All right, welcome back to the program. The final lap, Oluwakemi Akinde, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Meristem Securities, one of the licensed trading firm on our market. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure.
We appreciate that. So, let's start from what is present and constant. 2:30 in the afternoon, the central bank will make some announcements. Give us your take. What's your outlook?
Well, we think the central bank is going to maintain status quo, but with a focus on the banks. Now, regards to maintaining status quo, we look at the toolbox of the monetary policy. So, with regards to CRR, we think they're going to leave it as it is. Adjusting the CRR at this point, either reducing or increasing it, could give an impression of a policy. Increasing it could give an impression of a policy somersault, and that's an impact on the credibility of the CBN and also on their reputation capital. In regards to the liquidity level, we think it's healthy at the rate at which it is at the moment. Now, going over to MPR, we think they should also leave it where it is. Now, if you take a view on growth, you can say, fine, they should reduce the MPR in order to stimulate growth. But we need to put in mind the transmission mechanism. Now, what's the interest rate elasticity of consumption and investment? We need to know how this is going to transmit into the general economy. We need to also consider the average, consumer. Given that consumption accounts for about 70% of GDP, how low can the intertemporal rate of substitution go? So all these things need to be factored in. And if you put all those in consideration, you will realize that the marginal benefit of reducing MPR is indeed going to be marginal. So we think they should leave it as it. However, if they take a view on inflation, they might be tempted to, hike the rates, but we know that it's cost push and not demand push, so it's not going to address the issue.
Do you think the central bank has its back against the wall as far as the inflation targeting is concerned? I mean, its threshold, 6 to 9%, inflation is at 11.4%. Do you think today perhaps Godwin Emefiele will say, look, we need to readjust this a little bit further because things are getting out of hand as far as inflation is concerned?
Yeah, as I said, the inflation regime is actually cost push, and most of the factors are kind of temporary, and they're going to drop out of the equation over the medium term. Now, we also need to understand that we don't operate an inflation targeting regime. The policy of the central bank is monetary targeting, although they have an inflation range of 6 to 9%. But the inflation we're experiencing now, it's not unexpected, given the exchange rate pass-through and all that. So we know that inflation is going to still higher, but we think it's kind of temporary. It's going to drop out of the equation, as I said, in a couple of months. When we emerge from the downstream of this cycle, we think all those factors are affecting.
Do you think, therefore, that we'll be able to emerge by the next MPC meeting in May?
The inflation rates?
Yes. Do you think we would have emerged from the current economic situation? Perhaps the budget goes on the street very quickly. There's capital spending being ramped up between April and May. So when the MPC come back between May and June, you think that inflation would have moderated? Would have been opportunity for the central bank to tweak things down a little bit as far as the MPR is concerned to stimulate some growth?
Anyway, I think we should still focus on what they're going to do this afternoon before we move into that. Yeah, but actually, if you look at the drivers of the GDP, the factors actually driving the GDP growth downwards are broadly spread. So it's not concentrated maybe on consumption is affected, net export is affected, government export, everything is affected, business investment is affected. So it's more broad-based scenario. And the next MPC is going to be in the next 2 months, so we don't expect all these things to have actually, taken shape over the next 2 months. So we expect, a gradual recovery. And if you even look at the growth story, if you put it in different context, you appreciate, how it is. Now, 2015 growth came in at 2.79. Q4 was 2.11. If you put that in the context of like the U.S. economy, for the first time, we're growing above the U.S. economy at less than a percentage point. If you put that same growth story in historical context, it's even far below the recession average. To 2000 and the crisis, the 2007-2009 crisis is far below the average. So it's not something that I expect the growth to actually ramp up over the next 2 months, and then the CBN then begins to tweak the policy variable. So which direction are we looking at? Are you saying they're going to increase rates because the growth is already firming up? I don't think so. It's time for them to allow the growth to fully normalize. Are you saying they're going to reduce reduce rates in order to further them? As I said, if you look at you also need to factor in the interest rate, the transmission
all this
mechanism.
on the main street, all this on the main street from an economic point of view, from an investment and investors point of view. What will be the thought process right now from today onward? Putting the two streets together. I'm looking at GDP, I'm looking at inflation from the markets, from the main street, and I'm looking at my asset portfolio, whether it's bonds, bills, or stocks.
As I said, most of these things, we expect inflation to actually, get to double digits. That prognosis has been there even since last year. For GDP growth, we're expecting a kind of a slower growth regime as we're experiencing now. So it's only when we have those kind of surprises. Yeah, but one thing, as I said, we think the MPC is going to focus on the banking sector. If you look at the signals you were getting from the equities markets over the last, last week, it tells us something is going to happen to the banking. There may be a decision on the banking sector.
What is likely going to happen? Will that be based on 2015 numbers?
Now, let's take a look at the last MPC. Some numbers were actually read out by Dr. Doyin Salami. Looking at loan impairment of about 514. For the banks that have released results as we speak, the numbers are not close to that at all. So it shows that the results we're still expecting, we're going to see some high level of loan impairment. If you're looking at NPL formation, it's been rising. He said the banks with NPL above 5% have increased from 3 to 8. And 3 of those banks have NPL above 10%. So those numbers are actually staring in the face. And
credit risk?
we think, asset quality, credit risk. However, it's not. Maybe it's concentrated in among a few banks, kind of, because the banks that have released results so far, the results are being at least quite moderate and moderate.
But the profit warnings aren't encouraging either.
Yeah, the banks with profit warnings haven't actually released their results, and that's what I'm saying. That given the loan impairment numbers that we have and the current value we have based on the banks that release results, it shows that that a lot of them are concentrated in banks that have not released results. However, when we look at the portfolio, the macro-prudential toolbox, we think it's actually prudential for them to still maintain the thresholds as they are. And we also think the CBN actually saw this coming, because they increased the general provisioning from 1% to 2 percentage points in order to be able to give them more capacity to absorb these losses. So we think they actually saw it coming. But even like oil and gas exposure framework, they actually had to withdraw that. So we think what they should focus on is to speed up the implementation of Basel II, Basel III, and also bring up those asset exposure framework, and also stricter regulatory framework or oversight on the banks. Stem down the incidence of overtrading. You're already seeing loan to deposit ratio in excess of 80% and that. So we think they're going to focus more on those ones.
You need to get back to your desk before Emefiele made those announcements. So we got to let you out of here. Thank you very much. Oluwakemi Akide, a senior a chief economic officer at Meristem Securities, wrapping up the program for us today. News track is at the top of the hour. Don't forget the biggest sad story today from Brussels. The 2 attacks at the airports. It's been looked as terror attacks as we speak. A number of people are dead. The airport's closed. The metro line has also been shut down in the city. The stock markets in Europe are feeling the impact. Most important, the travel and airline companies listed on those markets. Stick around. 1:30 in the afternoon, Business Incorporated will bring you up to speed live from Frankfurt Stock Exchange, DWTV for Channels Television. I'm Bosa Mafai. Do have a great day and bye for now.